In the 12th year of having a crush on Miles, he proposed to me in public. Everyone said that he only chose me as the second best because his first love married someone else. I naively thought that we could develop feelings for each other over time after getting married. Until his first love became widowed, it felt like I became a widow too. Disregarding that I was pregnant, he went to accompany her for 3 days and 3 nights. I didn't cry or make a fuss. I quietly disappeared into the night. Later, when we met again, Miles tightly grasped my wrist, his voice trembling. "Nyla, where is our child?" I smiled faintly. "We don't have a child." Everyone said that Miles married me because Vicky married someone else. They fell in love at first sight and had an ambiguous relationship for 3 years. Just when it seemed that everything was going to work out for them, Vicky suddenly announced her wedding news. The groom wasn't Miles. He became a laughingstock. So, in a fit of anger, Miles proposed to me in public. There were no flowers, no rings, just 2 thin marriage certificates. Even my parents reminded me, "Nyla, Miles doesn't really love you." But I still married him without hesitation. Because I had been in love with Miles for 12 years. From the time when I first fell in love until I graduated from university, he had always been the only one on my mind. Even if the whole world was against it, I still held a glimmer of hope. I naively thought that we could develop feelings for each other over time after getting married. As long as I treated him well, really well. I got him as my husband, and I was sure that I would win his heart too. Until Vicky's husband died unexpectedly. She called Miles crying, "Miles, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. Could you come and accompany me?" "Okay," Miles agreed without hesitation. It was as if the person standing beside him at that moment wasn't me, his legal wife. Miles asked me to go home by myself. When he turned around, I gently tugged at his sleeve. He was very impatient and turned back, frowning and scolding in a low voice, "Someone died over there. Can't you be more sensible?" Actually, I didn't mean to stop him. In the 2 years since we got married, although he never mentioned Vicky in front of me, I knew that he had never let her go in his heart. Even when we were most affectionate, when he looked at me, it seemed like he was looking at someone else through me. So now I just wanted to tell him, "Miles, you're going to be a father." I hoped that for the sake of the child, even if he was alone with Vicky, he could abide by his duty. Don't let the child become a laughingstock before it was even born. Miles was stunned for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, I got it. You have a good rest at home. I'll go and check. I'll come back as soon as everything is okay." His "as soon as" turned out to be 3 days and 3 nights. During the day, he accompanied Vicky to deal with all kinds of things, and at night, he stayed at Vicky's house. My friends and parents called me, asking me to do something about Miles. But I couldn't even get through to Miles on the phone. On the first day, he still told me that he couldn't come back for the time being. There was no news on the second day. On the third day, I wanted to call to ask about the progress of dealing with the matter. But as soon as I made the call, he hung up. I called again, and he still hung up. After that, he even put me on the blacklist. There was no reason, or maybe there didn't need to be a reason. After all, the person he was accompanying now was Vicky. She was the person he had once wanted but couldn't have, his first love. On the 4th day, Miles brought Vicky back. He said that Vicky's emotions were very unstable now and that if she was left alone, something unexpected might happen. I took a look at Vicky standing beside him. Before I could say anything, she started crying pitifully. "Nyla, I'm just staying for a few days. There's nothing between Miles and me. Don't misunderstand." But looking at her, it seemed that she wished I would misunderstand. I smiled at Vicky and told her to stay at ease. Then I told her, "I'm pregnant and can't take good care of you. Please make yourself at home, Vicky." Vicky trembled violently when she heard this and turned pale as she looked at Miles. In this situation, it seemed that I was the mistress, pregnant with her husband's child, and she was silently questioning. And when facing her hurt look, Miles was indeed flustered. "I'll take you to rest first. We'll talk about other things later." Vicky was pulled by him for a few steps and then suddenly shook off his hand. After rushing into the room, she locked the door from the inside. Miles knocked on the door outside. Getting no response, he turned to look at me. That look was the familiar blame that I was used to. In the 2 years since we got married, although he didn't mention Vicky in front of me, others would. Occasionally, when I talked to others, he would look at me like this. It seemed that Vicky was such a sacred existence that I wasn't even worthy of mentioning her name. After that day, Miles never entered the master bedroom again. He slept in the guest room closest to Vicky's. At night when he was at home, Vicky was meek and sickly. During the day when he went out, Vicky sneered and asked me, "Nyla, how long are you going to endure this? Isn't it clear enough who Miles loves in his heart? Even if you're pregnant with his child, he won't love you. At worst, we can keep the child and get rid of you later. But do you trust your child with me?" This last sentence really reminded me. Miles didn't love me, so naturally, he wouldn't love my child either. If I gave birth, the child would either live a vagrant life with me or stay in the Miles family with Vicky as the stepmother. That shouldn't happen. And it couldn't happen. I put down the chopsticks in my hand and replied faintly, "Tonight. I'll talk to Miles tonight." Vicky raised her eyebrows, looking like she was waiting to watch a good show. That night, Miles came back very late. Vicky had eaten the food mixed with sleeping pills and went to bed early. Seeing me sitting alone in the living room, Miles asked, "Where's Vicky?" "She's asleep." He nodded and turned to go back to his room. Since Vicky became widowed, it felt like I became a widow too. The person who used to be so affectionate with me now found it annoying to even look at me. Although I had known from the very beginning that Miles was nice to me and intimate with me just to spite Vicky, I was too greedy. Knowing that everything was like a mirage, I still got trapped bit by bit. Now that the illusion had shattered and the truth was laid bare in front of me, I didn't want to accept it, but I had to. I clenched my fists and asked with difficulty, "Miles, have you ever loved me?" Miles stopped in his tracks and turned around with an impatient look on his face. He asked coldly in return, "We already have a child. Why are you talking about love or not now?" "But I love you so much. It's been 14 years. Before this second, my love for him had always been sincere. Unfortunately, my wish for developing feelings over time didn't come true. Now all that was left was mutual dislike. I also disliked him when I looked at him now. But thinking of the child in my belly, I couldn't help asking, "Are you looking forward to our child?" Miles pursed his lips tightly, and his brows almost knitted together. He wasn't looking forward to it. He just said, "No matter what happens in the future, if the child is born, our Miles family will raise it." Well, forget it. What? Probably because I spoke too softly, Miles didn't hear me clearly. I smiled and shook my head. "Nothing. It's getting late. You should go to bed early." After saying that, I didn't care what expression Miles had and walked ahead to the master bedroom. Maybe he would find it strange. Tonight, it seemed that I was clearly going to solve the entanglement between him and Vicky, but I only said half of what I wanted to say and suddenly stopped. He was ready to face my questioning or even scolding, but none of that happened. I just quietly disappeared into the night with my packed luggage after he fell asleep too. 14 years of sincere and fearless love came to an end tonight, ended by myself. Perhaps because I had been too nice to Miles in the past few years, he didn't take my disappearance seriously. He just thought that I was throwing a tantrum because I was pregnant, hoping that he would come and coax me. But now he was so focused on Vicky that even if I was really just throwing a tantrum and would come back if he coaxed me, he wouldn't be willing to do it. Fortunately, I wasn't throwing a tantrum. I disappeared completely. 1 month, 2 months, half a year passed, and I never showed up. Miles probably didn't look for me either. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heard nothing about it. I met him again in the workplace. In front of the clean floor-to-ceiling windows, he and Justin were chatting casually. Justin saw me appear and smiled, raising his chin to signal Miles to look back. Miles probably never thought that we would meet again in this way. In his heart, I was a bootlicker who couldn't stand on my own, so how could I be distant and cold to him? So when my gaze swept across his face without lingering, Miles thought he had seen wrongly. Justin beside him was a bit gloating. He held his fist loosely and put it to his lips, coughing gently. Miles came to his senses and quickly hid the surprise in his eyes. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Justin continued to stab him in the heart. "What's the matter? Don't you recognize your ex-wife?" Miles. After being speechless for a while, he finally looked up and met my eyes. In an instant, he moved his gaze down inch by inch and finally landed on my stomach. He seemed to be stunned. Even if I had kept the child, by this time, it would have already been born. What could he tell by looking at my stomach? I smiled and generously extended my hand to him. "President Miles, hello. I'm Nyla." Miles refused to shake my hand and even snorted coldly. Then he frowned and looked at Justin, asking with dissatisfaction, "What's the meaning?" Justin pretended to be innocent. "I don't mean anything. Aren't we all here to talk about business today?" "Business?" Miles gritted his teeth with a forced smile and suddenly cursed. "I'll talk about your fucking business." Justin. He didn't expect that Miles would lose his composure because of me. And I didn't expect it either. Everyone thought that I had already divorced Miles. Before leaving that night, I left the signed divorce agreement. It was to help him be with Vicky and, more importantly, to set myself free. I thought Miles would be very happy and would live happily ever after with Vicky, respecting and loving each other. However, at this moment, he was tightly gripping my wrist, and even his voice was trembling a little. "Nyla, where is our child? I had it aborted." On the third day after I left, I went to the hospital for the operation. Since I had no relatives or friends with me in the strange city, I hired a college student temporarily. The little girl was a kind-hearted person. Originally, she only needed to accompany me through the operation, but when she saw that I was alone, she stayed with me for half a day more. Before leaving, she told me to have a good rest and pay attention to nutrition. I smiled and nodded to her. As soon as she turned around, somehow, I suddenly began to cry. There was nothing around me, and my heart felt empty too. I knew that I couldn't blame anyone because all the choices were made by myself. But people's hearts are so soft, especially when they are vulnerable, they always can't help feeling pain. Fortunately, after crying bitterly that day, all the regrets and sadness were quietly hidden by me. I found a job and put all my energy into it. Probably because I worked so hard that in just 1 year, I achieved a triple jump in the company. This time, I also came to talk about cooperation with Miles on behalf of the company. Justin had only told him before that the representative was a woman. Miles never expected that this woman would be me. Moreover, judging from Justin's reaction, he deliberately didn't tell Miles. No wonder Miles lost his temper at this time. He glared at Justin viciously, then grabbed my hand and pulled me outside. I shook his hand off at once. Miles suddenly turned around. His expression seemed as if he wanted to cut me into pieces on the spot. I also got angry inside, but on the surface, I still had to pretend to be confused. "President Miles, what are you doing?" "I'm here to talk about cooperation seriously." "President Miles, don't misunderstand me as someone of dubious character." Miles' face darkened. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words back. Then, he looked at Justin. The latter was still smiling, looking like he didn't care at all. The Miles family and the Justin family had many cooperations. Although Miles and Justin were not childhood friends, they had known each other for many years. Even if Justin made Miles unhappy, for the sake of interests and their relationship, Miles wouldn't really fall out with Justin. He just said, "You go out first. I'll talk to her alone." Justin refused. "What if you do something to her? I won't be able to explain it to her later." Miles. If smoke could really come out of a person's head, there must be thick smoke billowing from his head at this moment. After he promised that he definitely wouldn't do anything to me, Justin hesitated and looked at me. As the saying goes, even an upright official finds it hard to settle family disputes. Actually, Justin didn't want to get involved in the relationship between me and Miles either. I understood his feelings. Besides, there was still cooperation to be discussed next. Even if I could avoid it today, I couldn't avoid it tomorrow. Those past events like a black history always have to be faced, and there must always be an end to them. I nodded to Justin. Then Justin walked out. Probably because it had been too long since I had been alone in the same space with Miles. Even though I had made mental preparations in advance, I still felt uncomfortable. Especially since Miles had been staring at me all the time. He asked that question again, "Nyla, where is our child?" I smiled faintly. "We don't have a child. Since I didn't want him anymore, how could I keep his child? Even though the doctor told me that I was in poor health and that if I missed this chance, I might never have a child again, I didn't hesitate." Miles seemed to be struck by lightning when he heard this. He was completely frozen and didn't move. I thought his reaction was quite funny. If he really cared about the child, how could he have brought Vicky home to live with him blatantly when he knew I was pregnant? I'm not a wooden block. A person who had loved him for over 10 years and was willing to have children for him, wouldn't she be sad and painful because of this? Did he provide the environment and mood that a pregnant woman needed? Since he had already done what he should and shouldn't have done back then, who was he putting on this hypocritical act for now? President Miles, I've already given you the answer to the question you wanted to know. So next, why? Before I could finish my words, Miles suddenly approached me with red eyes. Each of his words seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth, full of intense hatred. "Nyla, you can blame me and resent me, but the child is innocent. Why did you abort the child? I don't want to be a single mother. Then you could have given birth to the child and sent it to the Miles family. And then? Let Vicky be the stepmother of my child?" Perhaps I had been too euphemistic just now, so Miles didn't really understand what I meant. I don't want to be a single mother because I don't want to have a child related to you. So, does President Miles understand now? Nyla. Miles was furious and suddenly twisted my arm. I frowned in pain and even gasped. But he seemed to be blind and couldn't see it at all. Even worse, he said even more absurd words. "You loved me so much. How could you abort my child? Tell me, where did you hide the child?" My silence was deafening. I couldn't believe that the person I had loved for 14 years had such a dark and twisted heart inside. Miles. I called his name word by word, and then slowly pried his fingers open one by one. He exerted force, and I exerted even more force. Later, I couldn't even tell whether I simply wanted to break free from his grip or wanted to break his fingers. "Let go. I had already signed the divorce agreement and given it to you. We have nothing to do with each other anymore." Miles sneered. "I didn't sign it." Now it was my turn to be shocked. Why didn't he sign it? He could be free and be with Vicky if he signed it. Miles asked me if I wanted to know why he didn't sign the divorce agreement. At that second, I seemed to see a glimmer of expectation in his eyes. Just like the same expectation when I asked him if he loved me that night. But I didn't have any expectation now. So I wasn't interested in his answer either. I shook my head and reminded him in a cold tone, "President Miles, I came to meet you today for business." Miles was a bit annoyed at my attitude and sneered, "If you want to talk about business, fine. Let's talk about personal matters clearly first. But I've already cut off all ties with President Miles. We haven't got the divorce certificate yet, and I haven't seen the child. Is this what you call cutting off all ties? You." I really didn't understand why Miles insisted that I had given birth to that child. Was it because I had loved him too much before that it gave him the illusion that I couldn't live without him in my life? Had he ever thought that I was also a living person who would feel sad, heartbroken, and desperate? Just because I had loved him sincerely and fearlessly for over 10 years, did it mean that I had to waste the next few decades on him? I took a deep breath, feeling that it was really impossible to communicate with him, so I walked over and opened the door. Justin was standing at the door playing with his mobile phone. Seeing me suddenly open the door, he thought something had happened and nervously looked inside. I said in a low voice, "Let's stop here for today. Next time, we'll make an appointment to talk when his mood is stable." Justin nodded and motioned for me to leave first. Miles, however, strode after me at this time. If Justin hadn't blocked him, he might have really grabbed me. Miles glared at Justin impatiently and asked him, "Whose side are you on?" Justin lowered his voice. Can't you talk to her properly? How can I talk properly? Look at her. Does she seem to want to talk properly with me? It's your fault in the first place. What's my fault? She left without saying a word. That's because of you and Vicky. I walked quickly, and I couldn't hear the rest of the words. I went home. My parents were both surprised and happy to see me. Especially my mother. She held my hand and choked up several times, unable to speak. Later, when her emotions finally calmed down a bit, she still couldn't help bringing up Miles. When you just left, he came to our house to look for you. When he saw that you weren't there, he didn't ask much and just left. He and that Vicky went in and out together every day. They seemed to be so affectionate. Everyone thought that they would get married soon. But less than half a year later, the two of them suddenly fell out. At first, we didn't know the reason either. We just thought that young people had big tempers and were prone to quarreling. Later, Miles' parents came to us, begging us to tell them where you were. After we tried many ways to find out, we finally knew that Miles and Vicky had fallen out because Vicky couldn't have children. Miles is the only son in the family. How could his parents allow him to have no children? No wonder when we met today he seemed to be possessed and insisted that I had given birth to the child. In fact, in his heart, he hoped that I had already given birth to the child. Unfortunately, I didn't. I told my parents, I came back this time not only for work but also to have a break with him. It should have been broken off long ago. My father, who had been sitting silently on the side, suddenly said this. His tone wasn't harsh, nor did it mean to blame. But I still felt uncomfortable and lowered my head in shame, not daring to reply. My mother gave my father a reproachful look when she saw this. Then she comforted me, it's okay. It's all over. As long as you're okay in the future. My father also looked at me deeply. He was not good at expressing himself and could only encourage me with his eyes. Suddenly, I felt even more uncomfortable. My eyes felt sour, and I really wanted to cry. At the beginning, they had all advised me not to marry Miles in such a hurry. But I didn't listen. I thought that if two people were together every day, they would eventually fall in love. Even if there was no love, there would be family affection, responsibility, and morality. Until later, I found that Miles had nothing good except his good looks. He was only selfish and shameless. When I left my parents' house, I received a call from an unknown number. Worried that it was Miles calling, I didn't answer it. As a result, that number sent me a message, I'm Vicky. I had no idea where Vicky got my current mobile phone number, but I remembered the night when I left a year ago. It was too calm and too cowardly. So I wanted to hear what exactly Vicky wanted to say by calling me. After answering the call, Vicky immediately questioned me as soon as she opened her mouth. Why did you come back? What do you want to do? Although I wasn't facing her in person and she was also restraining her emotions, a person's voice will change along with the fluctuations of emotions. I still sensed her anger and nervousness. I deliberately smiled. Vicky immediately got furious. Nyla, what are you laughing at? Don't think that just because you gave birth to that child, you can really gain status because of your child. At least, Miles' heart has always been with me. Even if you continue to occupy the position of Mrs. Sue, you'll never win his heart. Who said I want his heart? Didn't I give both him and his heart to you? Vicky didn't expect me to say that. She was stunned for quite a while and then repeated the question, then what on earth did you come back for? I came back because of work and also because I missed my parents. Then you'll leave after finishing your work, right? That's my own business. I don't need to report it to you. But you've affected me and Miles. Vicky's final low growl made me find it rather funny. When I was pregnant and she moved into my home with Miles, didn't she think that it would affect me and Miles? Or was she just so double-faced and shameless that she could affect others but others couldn't affect her? Vicky, if you and President Miles really have a love stronger than gold, how could you be afraid of my influence? To be honest, President Miles and I haven't got the divorce certificate yet. We're still legally married. Who do you think you are? How dare you shout at me? Nyla, you bitch. Vicky suddenly started swearing and at the same time revealed her own secret. If it weren't for the fact that I can't have children, do you think Miles would even look at you? He was forced by his parents. He'll never love you. Then you go and persuade him to divorce me. It's me who wants the divorce now, but he doesn't want to. Vicky, impossible. Miles can't possibly be unwilling to divorce. I signed the divorce agreement when I left. Ask him if he has signed it. Suddenly, there was a deathly silence on the other end of the phone. I thought that Miles had never mentioned the divorce agreement to Vicky, so she didn't know about it at all. That night, I mixed sleeping pills into Vicky's food to make her fall asleep early so that I could negotiate with Miles without worry later. But Miles didn't know that I also added sleeping pills to the water he drank. He drank the water later and naturally fell into a deep sleep, completely unaware of my departure. At that time, I wasn't afraid that he would try to stop me. On the contrary, I was afraid that he wouldn't. I was afraid that I would be too embarrassed, couldn't hold on, and wouldn't have the courage to continue leaving. But I didn't expect that Miles wouldn't mention the divorce agreement to Vicky. What was he trying to do? Did he want Vicky to follow him without a proper status for the rest of her life? If one really loves someone, how could one bear to let her bear so much blame? Miles' feelings for Vicky were just the unwillingness when he couldn't get her and the boredom after getting her in the secular world. The first love would turn into plain rice, and the beauty mark would turn into a mosquito bloodstain. He didn't love me, nor did he love Vicky. The person he loved was only himself. Miles went crazy and had been investigating the matter of the child all the time. After digging deeper layer by layer, he naturally found out about the female college student who accompanied me to the hospital for the operation. Actually, when I was busy with work later, I had also looked for that girl. Her family conditions were not good. During her college years, she had been looking for various part-time jobs outside to earn money just to relieve the burden on her family. I wanted to help her. So when I was usually so busy that I hardly had time to touch the ground and didn't want to eat takeout, I would ask her to cook at home and send the food over. Gradually, we became familiar with each other. She once asked me why I went to a strange city alone and was so determined to have the child aborted. At that time, many excuses flashed through my mind, but in the end, I just sighed softly. I didn't expect that one day, I would be reluctant to mention Miles in front of outsiders. I just wanted the past to be like the wind, leaving no trace. However, Miles was unwilling to let me go. He got confirmation from the girl's mouth that I had indeed aborted the child. Then, he rushed to me and roared as he questioned me, "Why did you abort the child? Didn't you love me very much?" "I don't love you anymore." "I don't believe it. Before you left that night you were still asking me if I loved you. How could you stop loving me just a few days later and go to abort the child?" I didn't know either. It seemed that that night was the critical point of all my feelings for him. Once I crossed that point, I didn't love him anymore. I told Miles, "I know why you're so obsessed with that child. It's because Vicky can't have children." A flash of embarrassment and confusion at being exposed immediately appeared on Miles' face. In an instant, he said stubbornly, "I care about that child. It has nothing to do with whether Vicky can have children or not. I just care about my own flesh and blood." I smiled sarcastically, "Since President Miles just wants to have a child, anyone will do. Why bother pestering me?" "Miles, but I don't want to spend energy getting familiar with strangers again, and my parents may not like them either. Look how selfish and clever he is. He always acts in his own interests and never considers the lives of others." I really didn't want to talk to him much, so I just left him with a disgusted look and then walked away straight. Soon, his father Victor came to see me. Although Victor didn't say it explicitly, he was hinting at a deal with me using the technology in his hands, but between the lines, he meant that he wanted me to get back together with Miles. I was too lazy to beat around the bush with him, so I directly asked, "Mr. Sue, do you mean that as long as I get back together with your son and give birth to a child, the technology you have can be given to me unconditionally?" Victor picked up the teacup in front of him, took a sip, and then smiled. "After you get back together with Miles, you'll still be a member of our Miles family." Since we're family, using our own things, why talk about conditions or not? But I don't want to. Victor didn't expect that even though he had come to see me in person and offered what he thought was a condition that lowered his status, I was still ungrateful. So his face changed instantly. You don't want to? Why don't you want to? Although there are indeed some unclear things between Miles and Vicky, this kind of thing is too common among men. If you keep dwelling on this point, you won't be able to get along with anyone in the future. Mr. Sue, are you telling me by saying this that you're also a person who had an affair during marriage? With a bang, Victor slammed the table and stood up. He pointed at my nose and cursed, "Who do you think you are? How dare you lecture me? I don't dare. I'm just making the most reasonable speculation based on what Mr. Sue said. Get out, Mr. Sue, this is the hotel where I'm staying, not your company." Looking at his angry back as he left, I didn't feel relieved in my heart. If the cooperation with the Miles family couldn't be reached, the company would have to increase the cost and look for other partners abroad. Although I had achieved remarkable results in the past year and the company wouldn't fire me just because of this one failure. But I still felt a bit sorry for bringing losses to the company because of my personal reasons. I should have told the company clearly about the matter between me and Miles that day, but I also felt it was too embarrassing to talk about. After some hesitation, I called my boss. Unexpectedly, my boss told me good news. The foreign company opened a branch in China last month. I originally thought that the Miles family's asking price was too high. Since we can't reach an agreement, forget it. The branch of the foreign company has just opened and definitely needs cooperation too. You should hurry up and go there. Okay, I'll set off right now. What a lucky break. I don't have to face Miles anymore. The negotiation with the other company went very smoothly and the cooperation was quickly finalized. On the day when I went back to the company to attend the celebration banquet, Justin called me. He said that Miles was drunk and refused to leave his house. I was very puzzled. He's drunk. Why are you calling me? Justin sighed on the other end of the phone, because he's been calling your name all the time. You must have heard wrong, Justin. Shall I let you hear it? No need. Even if Miles really kept calling my name after getting drunk, I didn't want to hear it. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, Justin suddenly said, "Miles, he should be regretting it. Regretting that when I loved him wholeheartedly in the past, he ignored my feelings. Regretting that after I left, he thought smugly that I was just throwing a tantrum. Regretting that he didn't look for me. Regretting many, many things. Especially now that he sees you're living so well. He must be feeling very sad in his heart. A person who has been spoiled since childhood is used to being self-centered. He thought you would always love him and wouldn't leave him, but you left so suddenly that he didn't even have time to react. In the past, he and Vicky showed their love so ostentatiously. In fact, he was angry with you and also trying to stimulate you, hoping that you would come back on your own initiative. Miles is a person who cares too much about his face. After reuniting with you this time, he was actually very happy in his heart, but he couldn't bring himself to say it, so he's been pestering you with the matter of the child. Nyla, how do you feel about him? I don't regret it. I knew what Justin was going to ask, so I interrupted his words in time. In this world, no one will always stand still and wait for another person. And Justin was silent for a moment and then replied, "Then I know. When Miles wakes up, I'll persuade him. It's none of my business." I hung up the phone directly. Originally I thought there would be no more entanglement between Miles and me except for him agreeing to the divorce and asking me to go back to get the divorce certificate. However, to my surprise, he pleaded in front of my parents and even bribed some of my relatives and friends. As a result, my mobile phone never stopped ringing. All day long, there were always people finding excuses to contact me and then beating around the bush to speak well of Miles. They said that all men were the same and that considering Miles was good-looking and wealthy, I could just muddle through life with him. After all, if I changed to another man, there was no guarantee that he would be loyal forever. At first, I just ignored them all. But later, I got so annoyed that I blocked them one by one. In today's society, it's not like a woman can't survive without living with a man. Isn't it good to be wealthy and free on your own? Perhaps it was because I blocked all those lobbyists that Miles came in person. But I was so busy with work that I didn't have time to listen to his hypocritical confessions. After following me for a few days and seeing that I completely ignored him, Miles became impatient. He stopped me at the entrance of our company, regardless of the people coming and going, and then, on the condition that he agreed to the divorce, he said he wanted to talk to me. I looked down at my watch and told him, "President Miles, you've got only 15 minutes. I have an appointment with someone tonight." Miles smiled bitterly. "Nyla, you've become very different from before." Well, wasn't that the truth? Half of my life had been spent on loving him. When I was at school, I studied like crazy just to be in the same school as him. He liked golf, so I learned it. He liked horse riding, and I learned that too, all just to have more common interests with him. Later, even though I knew he had Vicky in his heart, I still agreed without hesitation when he proposed to me. I thought that sincerity could be exchanged for sincerity, but all my sincerity brought me was humiliation and pain. At this moment, I told Miles, "You don't have to pester me anymore, because I can't have children anymore." Miles didn't seem surprised when he heard this. He just nodded gently. "I know. I knew it when I went to the hospital to ask about your operation last time." "Then why are you still pestering me, Nyla? I regret it." Finally, he said he regretted it himself. But I didn't feel anything in my heart. It turns out that when you don't care about someone anymore, there's neither love nor hate. When facing him, I felt completely calm, even less emotional than when facing a stranger. Miles was about to say something else, but as soon as he opened his mouth, his expression suddenly changed drastically. It seemed that something terrifying had happened behind me. I was just about to turn around when he pulled me over, and then both of us were lifted off the ground. Miles and I were hit and sent flying by a car. And the driver turned out to be Vicky. Miles had been following me these days and hadn't contacted Vicky. This made Vicky furious. After finding out Miles' whereabouts, she chased after him unexpectedly. She happened to see Miles begging me humbly to make up. Vicky's emotions exploded completely at that moment. She wanted to run us over. Fortunately, neither Miles nor I died. However, Miles was more seriously injured than I was. When I woke up in the hospital, Miles was still in the emergency room. The hospital had already contacted the parents of both of us, and they were on their way. The person accompanying me was a colleague from the company. She didn't know about the past between Miles and me and even praised Miles. I didn't respond, and my mind was blank. It wasn't until my parents showed up and called my name several times that I came to my senses. The sense of fear hit me all at once then. I hugged my mom and cried silently but violently. "Don't be afraid, Nyla. Don't be afraid." My mom patted my back to comfort me, wishing she could bear everything for me. My dad also touched my head affectionately. Fortunately, I was still alive and could see my parents again. Miles was paralyzed. Because of this, his parents were so angry that they wished they could cut Vicky into pieces. Later, they came to see me once. At first, they tried to persuade me with both emotion and reason, hoping that I would go back to Miles. Seeing that I was unmoved, they started to morally blackmail me. "If it weren't for you, Miles wouldn't have come here, and none of this would have happened. You have to be responsible for it all your life. Besides, you and Miles haven't got the divorce certificate yet. You can't escape." Just when they were making a big fuss, Justin pushed Miles in. From the time the accident happened until now, both Miles and I had been staying in this hospital, but we hadn't visited each other. I didn't want to see him. As for what Miles was thinking, I had no idea. Today, when he suddenly showed up, sitting in a wheelchair, I was a bit surprised. He just quickly glanced at me and then looked at his parents and called them out. I thought he would come back, but he didn't. Justin didn't come back either. He just sent me a message: "You'll get what you want." At first, I didn't understand what it meant. It wasn't until more than half a month after I was discharged from the hospital that I received a call from Miles. He said, "Nyla, come back and get the divorce." After we had experienced life and death and after he was paralyzed, he agreed to the divorce. On the day we got the divorce certificate, Justin pushed Miles there. Miles remained silent all the time. It was only after all the divorce procedures were completed and the three of us walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau together that he called me softly, Nyla. I turned around and asked him, anything else? He smiled at me and said, happy divorce. I nodded. But in my heart, I didn't seem that happy. It wasn't because I still had feelings for Miles. It was because so many things had happened during this period that I was extremely tired. Miles asked me what my plans were next. I told him, I'll probably go out to relax. Well, have a good time, thank you. After this simple conversation, I walked towards my car. After getting in the car and fastening my seatbelt, I received a message from an unknown number. Will we meet again in the future? No. I had already taken my parents with me. I probably won't come back to this city again in the future. I didn't reply to that message. After going through so much, he should understand. There was no way back then, and there will be no me in the future. The end.